Hey everyone, welcome to our May edition of Knitting 411 where we answer your knitting questions. Welcome, I'm glad you're here with me today. I just left a question in the chat just asking where you're streaming in from today. Just make sure okay, audio is working. We're all good to go. Let me see, we've got Mary. Oh, I should switch to another screen. Popping right up on here. There we go. From Southern California. Hey, Mary in Southern California. And New York Knitter is here. Hello, hello. And I guess more people will be popping in probably as we go along. So this is all about answering questions, all of your knitting related questions. And I usually ask for those who don't know, who maybe this is your first time here, sometime Friday or Saturday or so, I pop a question in the community and it should show up like if you are scrolling through YouTube and you're subscribed, it might show up on your homepage or on your subscription feed or someplace there. I usually get my words out today. I usually ask on there like a few days ahead of our live stream what questions people would love to discuss, and they can leave them there. And then also during the live, if you didn't pre-submit your question, it's fine to ask it here as well. But we are going to go through the pre-submitted questions first. We only had 6, so we are going to get right into them. Oh, hey, Ozgay in Istanbul. This is nice. Hey, Istanbul. It's so nice to have you here. I'm watching a Turkish drama, right? Or, well, romantic comedy TV show. Oh, I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but I think like that's probably, I just keep finding them on YouTube and I just keep watching new ones. So really nice to see somebody from Turkey here. Hi, Ozgay. Okay, so we're gonna get right to our questions. Let me get to our first one. So the first one is from Farmer's Wife. I'm curious about why edges roll. I understand that stockinette does roll, but why does it roll? It's a really good question. Also curious about why collars and cuffs might roll even when ribbing is used. I just finished working the collar and cuffs on a Kylie top and both rolled before I tried it on, but ended up being fine. Thanks in advance. Okay, so I'm gonna go to my overhead and we're gonna talk about stockinette and the structure of stockinette stitch and the opposite of stockinette, which is reverse stockinette stitch. So we'll talk about both of those, but I don't want to forget the second half of your question about why the collars and cuffs still might roll even when ribbing is used. There's a few reasons that can happen. First of all is if there isn't enough of it, because when you have, well, with stockinette stitch, you've got all your knits on one side, all your purls on the other. So that's why it's going to roll. We're going to get into that, why that happens. If you have stitch patterns where they're more evenly distributed across both sides of the fabric, like ribbing, like seed stitch, like garter stitch, those don't roll because we are evenly distributing those knits and purls. But if your edging isn't long enough, then it might not be enough to keep it from rolling. And that can happen because, let's say you're knitting a baby sweater with a little bit of ribbing, that might be fine. If you're knitting like a very large adult size sweater, the larger that width or circumference, and trying to use just a tiny bit of some kind of an edging, the less likely it is that it's going to be enough because it's such a wide or I can't remember my words today. Or like the circumference is too large. Either one of those. You need, the bigger it is, the more edging you're probably going to need to offset that roll. The smaller in like either circumference or width, probably the less you're going to need. It could also flip because of like the needle size change. If you're changing needle sizes, sometimes you might not change, like you might have to drop more than you think, or there could be a few reasons. It could be your needle size as well. It could be that there's not enough edging to combat that curl. That curl sometimes really is strong and really wants to curl. But it could be a few reasons. But generally, like you say, it does kind of, if it's just like a little bit, you can kind of block it out. That's one of those things you kind of have to test. Animal fibers will tend to sort of relax into that shape, especially if you have an edging on there. But again, if you've got like a really large adult sweater and just using a tiny bit of ribbing, probably isn't going to be enough to control the curl. But a smaller circumference, and I would think a collar or a cuff is smaller. But again, I mean, sometimes collars can be really wide. So it can be for a few reasons. I don't know if anybody else has any thoughts on that as well, but pop them in the chat. And we're going to go to the first part of your question about why it rolls. Let me go to my overhead. So we're going to cover the very basics of like what a stitch is. Now I have also below, I have a link to a video about reading your knitting. And I also have an article to the TECHknitting website. She's got some fabulous articles over there and one that goes into a lot of detail about this. So, I mean, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but she's got diagrams and everything like that in that article. So you find them linked down below. But first of all, let's talk about a stitch. Stitch anatomy. Let me brighten that up just a bit. Okay, so a stitch has a couple parts. It has a head, the top part of the stitch, and it has two legs or arms, depending on how you want to refer to them. I generally refer to them as legs because, you know, your pattern might tell you to knit through the back leg or the back loop, so I just call it a leg. Some people call it arm. I think in the TECHknitting article, she calls it arm. So we have two legs, we have a head, and then beneath that part, we have these running bars that are connecting to the stitch on either side. So here's another stitch here. So there's the running bar that connects the two stitches together. So when you're looking at a stitch on the stockinette side, you only see this part of the stitch, the two legs. You don't see the head, you don't see these connecting bars. So all of these parts of the stitches, so the stockinette side here, we're just seeing basically the V's. We're seeing the two legs of the stitch that creates all of these V's. And all of these V's are wider and shorter than the corresponding parts of the stitch on the back. So the corresponding parts of the stitch on the back are the head of the stitch and the running bars. We don't see the legs. If we flip this over and look at this side, you don't see the legs of the stitch. You only see the head of the stitch right here, and you see the running bars that connect to the other stitches on either side. So this part of the stitch is actually, it ends up being taller than the front, than the V of the stitch, but it's also narrower. So the V is wider than the space that this purl head takes up. So that means the width of the fabric, if this part's wider, it wants to keep going and it curls to the back because it's wider than each of those stitches on the back itself. Like the whole fabric, if you press it out, it's not different, but each individual stitch, like all you can see for a stitch here is the head of a stitch and then the two running bars that connect to the other side. And that head of the stitch is narrower than that same stitch on the front where you can see both legs of the stitch. So this makes this wider, which means the front wants to curl back this way. Now we have the opposite problem in the other direction. The stitches are shorter this way on the front, the legs that we see right here, they are shorter than the part of the stitch on the back. All of the sections of the heads and the running bars on the back are longer. So that makes them want to go this way and curl around to the front. So that's a long answer to say that it's just the anatomy of a stitch. The anatomy of a knit stitch is short and wide, and the anatomy of what's presenting on the back is purl stitches. They are taller, but they're narrower. So that means this fabric, because it's wider, wants to curl to the back, and these stitches, these purl stitches in the back are taller. They want to curl to the front to take up more space. So hopefully that answers your question about Farmer's Wife. Well, for Farmer's Wife. Let me go back to my questions here. So let me see. So that's why it rolls. Yes, okay, I think I answered everything. But you'll find, I found that article on TECHknitting and then also a video just about the basics of like stitch anatomy, because it's an important thing every knitter should know. We don't necessarily have to know why stockinette rolls, but the understanding of like what part of a stitch you're seeing in different fabrics. Like in stockinette, you only see the legs of the stitch. In reverse stockinette, you only see the head of the stitch and then the two running bars that are connecting to the other stitches. Okay, and I see we've got more questions in the chat. So I'm going to put a star on those. And we've got a couple more people here. Hi, Cindy in Iowa. And Donna, hi, in Alberta, Canada. Nice to have you here. And okay, I see your question, Patricia and Donna. So I'm just going to put a star on these. We're going to get to them after I answer all of the pre-submitted questions. And Diana in Central Texas. Hi, Diane, hi, nice to have you here too. And Elvira in Argentina, welcome. So glad to have you here. Okay, so question number 2 is from Valerie. I knit a top-down seamless raglan with superwash wool as per pattern recommendations. The wool has very little twist. I wore it a few times last year, and this year when I pulled it out of storage, I was amazed on how little structure it had around the neck and how long it has grown. I understand I can unravel the hem to get the length I want, but I'm unsure about my neckline options. A few things here, without going down a huge rabbit trail about choices for top-down sweaters. Superwash yarn is not great. I know designers use it for things, but in my opinion, it's not great for garments without structure. And by structure, I mean shoulder seams. Seams at the shoulders give the garment something to hang on to. If there's no structure here, all the weight is stuck on the neckline. So top-down raglan, top-down circular yoke, everything's sitting here on the neckline, which isn't terrible per se if you have the right type of yarn. Natural wools, a lot of animal fibers, those work really well. Acrylic works really well because they have natural elasticity and they're pretty lightweight. Plant fibers, not so elastic, a little heavier, they tend to stretch out, so they're not great choices when there are no seams. But that doesn't mean they're impossible to use. Superwash kind of also falls into this category because the fibers that want to stick together in natural wool that give it that bounce and elasticity, that's missing. So in a superwash yarn, they've either been coated or they've been burnt off. So those fibers, the scales, they don't have anybody to stick together to. So they are like sliding past each other. They're more similar to plant fibers. So what you have to do to offset that is to knit it at a tighter gauge. And I can't say that all designers do this. I mean, honestly, anybody can like knit a sweater, you know, grade it, write up a pattern and sell it. I'm not saying that, but sometimes yarn choices aren't great in some patterns. And in my opinion, when it comes to sweaters without structure, you need to be careful of the yarn choice that you're making, even as a designer, because some yarn choices are going to stretch out with time. And superwash can be one of them. You need to knit it at a tighter gauge to make sure it's going to hold its shape. And also, it's meant to go in the dryer, and that will bring it back to life, like a lot of plant fibers as well. Sometimes, I mean, I still wash them on a gentle cycle in my washing machine, but a lot of them I put in the dryer because that actually is beneficial to them. And superwash is the same in some regards, with the caveat that depending on how it's been treated to get that superwash, the coating can sort of wash off eventually. And then your sweater can actually felt, but there's no way to know like which yarns, which superwash yarns, which method they've used to make it superwash. If they've burnt those scales off, they're not coming back. But if it's just been sort of coated down, that coating can get washed off. But I would attempt maybe throw it in the dryer and see if that will, you know, get it wet, throw it in the dryer for a bit and see if that will help spring it back to life. But now that I had my little rant about superwash and plant fibers and appropriate yarn choices for seamless sweaters, for a neckline, you already have the sweater done. There's nothing you can go do about that. But before you adjust the length, I would wash it and I would put it in the dryer and see if that shrinks it back up again. That does, it works really well. It's not going to help much with the neckline though. So what you could do is reinforce the neckline either with like some elastic thread. You could run it like, let's say you have ribbing at the neckline, run it through like the transition between the ribbing and the whatever the body stitch pattern is, run it through that area, maybe run it through a couple more times above that. That elastic can give it a little more structure. I mean, it's going to give it elasticity as well, so you can still get it off and on your head, but it should add a little more structure. Another option would be to like do a crochet chain. I'm not sure. I've never done it myself, but I've heard of people doing it. So, but it's something you could research. And that chain can also add some structure as well around the neckline. So those are two things that you can try. But also put it in the dryer and see if that will like adjust the length for you. And I'm going to check the comments and see if anybody has anything to say about that. Hey, Stacy in Missouri, nice to have you here. So Jess has some advice. Let me move that down a bit. When I have a plant fiber, I also use twisted stitches for any ribbing. Yeah, that it's not as elastic as like regular ribbing, but it does hold its shape really well. And Superwash gets twisted stitches in the ribs, yeah. And Caitlin in Washington State. Hi, Caitlin. Okay, Ozzy, I see your question as well. I'm going to star those and save them for later. So question number 3. And anybody else, if you have thoughts and advice on anything that we're talking about, go ahead and put them in the chat. I mean, the chat's not moving super fast, so I can kind of keep up with it. But next question from Enabling Curiosity. I'm curious about what holding 2 yarns together changes the weight to. There doesn't seem to be any consistency on Ravelry. Sometimes lace plus lace equals fingering, sometimes DK and sometimes DK. Lace and fingering usually DK, but sometimes worsted. 2 fingering or 3 lace are often worsted, but sometimes DK. Goes on and on and on. Well, there's a couple of things going on here. First of all, there isn't really, I mean, we have the Craft Yarn Council, so we sort of have some standardizations, but yarn manufacturers can put whatever they want on their label. I don't know about you, but sometimes I've knit with like a worsted weight yarn, and I'm like, oh, this feels really light. This is closer to a DK, you know, in my opinion. And I like the fabric of it better at like a DK weight gauge. So that's the first thing, is every yarn, even though it might say it's like 1 yarn weight, it might not feel that way to you. And then the second thing is, well, speaking specifically to Ravelry, and I'm going to say like the designers who are using the 2 yarns held together, it's their choice what they want to call that weight, because I could knit a swatch with a yarn and I could decide I want it to fall within like the standard, let's say it's a DK weight yarn. I want it to fall within whatever I can't even remember how many stitches per inch. Okay, in a worsted weight, it's like 20 to 24 stitches to 4 inches. So I could decide to knit the garment I want to knit or my swatch for the design, trying to meet that parameter. Or I might think, oh, I don't want it, I want it to be a little more loose. I want it to be like 18 stitches. So I could still call it a worsted weight because that's the yarn I'm using, but I might have a different gauge or want to use a different gauge. So with the specifically from Ravelry, the designers can pretty much call it whatever they want when they're holding 2 yarns together. So in that regard, it's also confusing because, of course, unless you're using the same yarn, you want to use a different yarn, and who knows what gauge that's going to be. Okay, well, there are 2. I put 2 links down below, and we're going to go look at those really quickly. I feel like I'm saying a lot of things and then saying, who knows, it doesn't really matter, it's going to change. And yeah, it's kind of is. The first one is this article on yarn weight key for holding 2 strands together, who has done sort of the work for us. She has some of the table here from the Craft Yarn Council. She has a link to the Craft Yarn Council as well. But then in general, she has looked at, or whoever the host or writer of this blog is, has looked at different yarn brand websites and used the general guidelines that they have listed. So you can see in their case, in what they consider 2 strands of lace equals fingering or sock, but even sport. So it doesn't, you know, even that's going to be a change. 2 strands of sock could be sport or DK. And then 2 strands of sport could be DK or light worsted. Like it's hard to judge because every yarn is going to be different. Even 2 yarns that are both considered worsted, one might be thick, one might be thin, you know, closer to DK or closer to like an Aran weight. But it's a guideline kind of thing. So this is also a guideline, but that doesn't mean that the designer of the patterns you're looking at is following this guideline. They could just be using their own. You know, they're holding two strands together, they're getting a gauge they like, and they kind of maybe generalize about which yarn weight that would fall into, holding those two yarns. You might like use the same exact yarns, knit a swatch, get the same gauge, and hate the fabric. Maybe it's too loose, maybe it's too tight. You just don't like it. That can happen as well. And there are things you can do to like knit a pattern to your own gauge instead. And so this is like a rough guideline that you can start with. If you want to get more technical, Talvi Knits has an article that goes into the math. I'm not going to go into the math because I don't want to do math. But if you want to actually use very specific yarns and figure out the math on how thick those two yarns held together would be, she has some great graphs on here. And she covers both if they're the same yarn weight, like it's worsted weight and you're holding it double, or if you are using two different yarn weights. So she has all of the explanations on how to do this. And it's all spelled out in here. So if you have a specific yarn, then you can use the math to figure out exactly how thick that would be. And you would probably want to use like the Craft Yarn Council. She's got it here, wraps per inch, needle size and all that. But like the number of stitches in 4 inches, that's going to at least get you in the ballpark of where that yarn should technically fall. So hopefully that answers that. I feel like there's a lot of variation in this part of that conversation because it's really up to the designer, and designers can do what they want and call it what they want. You might not agree with them when you knit your swatch about what that gauge should be. So let me just scroll back and see. Lynn in Pennsylvania, hi. Oh, thank you, Jess. Don't forget to give the video some, oh, there we go. Some love with a thumbs up. Yes, I appreciate that. That helps it spread to more people. Thank you very much. And Caitlin says, I use this site to approximate the weight of yarns held together. So I'm assuming one that we just showed. If it's a different one, put it in the chat so everybody else can see what websites you're using. But I did some, Googling and looking around, and these seemed like really good ones. I wanted one that's what I would use is kind of more general if I don't want to do math, but then I liked the one on Talvi Knits if you really want to be precise about what that yarn weight is going to be. Then you can do some math and figure that out. Yes, and grist, that's how thick the yarn is, something that to take into consideration. 2 cotton is going to be very different than 2 wool. Yes, that's very true. I hadn't thought about fiber content as well. Like the weight of the yarn compared to the fiber content. Like cotton weighs more than wool is going to weigh. And then even 2 wools might weigh differently depending on how they are spun. So I feel like we could really go down a rabbit trail on that conversation there, but hopefully that answers your question. That was this question, yes. Okay, so back to our questions. We have 3 more and then we'll get to the live questions as well. So anybody have thoughts about this as well? Why do some working yarn strands get twisted up and others don't, and how can I avoid it? I'm a continental knitter. I think that plays into it, but I'm not sure how or why. Couple things. First of all, if you think it's the way you knit, I think it's a good idea to like somehow try to record yourself knitting, like a top-down view of your hands as you knit. And not as you're like paying attention to how you knit, like let yourself get into your knitting rhythm and record that. And then watch it and see what you are doing. This is the best way to figure out if you have tension issues and what you're doing. Like, are you doing some little thing? Like, personally for me, my purl stitches are slightly tighter than my knit stitches. It's because the way I hold the yarn with the way in my left hand, the way I hold it, I tend to pull it down as I'm making that purl stitch. I don't do that same little flick with my finger when I do a knit stitch, so it makes it slightly tighter. I only figured this out when I like recorded my hands and I realized, oh, I'm doing this one little movement just on my purl stitches. So this is also a chance to figure out if the yarn is twisting because of you. Is it something that you're doing that can cause that yarn to twist? So I can't imagine, I mean, it might, I'm not sure, but it could also be because of the actual twist of the yarn itself. You can have two yarns that are both worsted weight, but one is like kind of lightly spun and one is like super, super like kind of maybe even overspun. That overspun yarn is going to twist a lot more than a lightly spun yarn. So it could just be the yarns itself, but it could be the way you handle things. So I do think it's worth like, when I first tried this, I didn't have anything to hold my phone in. So I had it like between my chin, you know, like right here, which was kind of weird. But if you have some way of like getting into your knitting rhythm and recording your hands and then like slowing that down and watching it back, what are you doing that could be causing, you know, tension issues or your yarn to twist or anything like that? It's worth like trying to figure that kind of thing out. So next question. Cheryl, should you weave in ends and then block or block then weave in ends? I think we need a poll. Who does what? Who weaves in their ends first? Who weaves them in after? I'm in the camp of before. I weave them in, but I leave a long tail, and then I can wash and block and then make sure everything is secure, and then I can trim them short after I've made sure they're secure. I like to do that because, well, probably because like the yarn wants, after it gets wet and dries, it wants to stay in the shape it's in. So if I've woven in that tail and then it gets wet, it wants to stay in the shape of however it's been woven in. I generally try to use duplicate stitch. And then I know it's just going to stay there, like it's kind of locked in. Getting it wet, letting it dry, for most fibers is kind of like a good way to lock them in. So that's why I weave them in first, because they're just kind of locked in place at that point. And then I can check, make sure nothing, you know, looks wonky or bad or showing to the right side, and then I can trim off that long tail. But if anybody else has thoughts on that. And a couple notes for our last question for about the yarn twist. Jess says, could be also the difference in the direction of the twist of the plies. Yep, that makes a difference as well. And yeah, recording is a good idea. How athletes rewatch their place. Yes, exactly. It's the same thing. Like you can watch your hands and see what you're doing. And Joan says, yep, weaving in ends first, blocking, and then trimming them down. Weave in while camp, or weaving in while you go maybe, and then leave the tail. Oh, I didn't know that, Craig. I'm doing the Taming Tension course with TKGA, and filming yourself knitting is one of the assignments. Just have to get a setup to record. Yeah, I mean, if you can find somebody who's willing to hold your phone, but there are like not very, like probably less than 20 bucks, like clip things that will hold phones or whatever, which are nice too if you want to have your phone like up and you can watch a video on it or something. Then something like that is really good. I didn't know it was part of the course though. That's really neat. Kind of cool that I'm recommending something that's in that course. I have never taken that course, but who teaches that? I think it's Binka Schwan. She's fabulous. I've seen some of her other presentations. And there are a few yarns on the market that are Z-twist, mostly marketed to crocheters, because S-twist yarn can twist on itself because of the way some people crochet. Yeah, we could really go down a deep dive on ply and twist and all of that, that's for sure. And then I weave in my, Mary says I weave in my ends, then block, and then trim the ends. Same. Okay, yeah. One more question. There it is. Okay. Lori says, I'm thinking about knitting a V-neck top. It's knit top down. First you knit flat and then join in the round after the V-neck is done. The whole thing is stockinette stitch. The pattern says the gauge is X stitches and X rows over 4 inches in stockinette. It does not say in the round. Would I swatch flat or in the round? Well, the key is what the gauge says, and the gauge is in the stitches and rows over 4 inches. If it were in the round, it would say stitches and rounds over 4 inches. So I'm guessing this pattern wants you to take a flat gauge measurement, but because you are technically doing both, you're going to be starting flat and then knitting in the round. If it were me, I would do both because I'd want to know if my gauge is going to change. Maybe the pattern doesn't mention that, but the key is to look, does it say rows or rounds in the gauge statement? And that will tell you whether it should be knit flat or in the round. But you have to do both. So it's probably a good idea to swatch with both. Like you could start by swatching flat, and then you could do like that speed swatch in the round where you don't, you know, you're using a circular needle, you just slide it to the end and bring the working yarn to the back, and you always see the front, you're never purling across. then you could like do 2 sections and see. Maybe your gauge will be exactly the same, but it's better to know before you start knitting a whole sweater to discover that your gauge changes. It might even change quite drastically. You'd want to know that before you start knitting. But it looks like this pattern does say that it expects you to knit flat because it does say rows, it doesn't say rounds. So that is all the questions that we had. So let me just check the comments. Oh, and turning your work. I hadn't thought about that. So talking about twists, if I turn my work one direction and it twists up but not the other. So yeah, if you're knitting in the round too and you're always turning the same way, you might be causing some twist. Or what was I doing? I think it was when I was doing some intarsia and stranded knitting. If I kept turning, I would have to pay attention to how I was turning so it wouldn't always keep getting twisted. So if I turned it this way once, I would turn it back the other way. So it would keep them kind of straight and not twisting them together. Okay, so let's go see your questions. So Patricia, what's your opinion of Addi Flexi-Tip needles for knitting socks, and what size do you use? I use a 2.25 millimeter is my preference. I like my socks a little on the tight side. 2.25 millimeter gets me about close to 9 stitches to the inch, which the patterns I generally write, I write for 8 stitches to the inch, but I like them personally a little bit tighter because it just gives your sock a little more structure, a little more durability. And I do like Addi Flexi-Flips. I'm not sure, I mean, I've used them. They're not my favorite. I can use them. I have some. I've done a tutorial using them, but I can never quite figure out how to hold them. Like the ones I'm not using, like do I leave them flopping over the back of my hand? Do I curl them under my hand? I'm just never quite sure how to hold them. I like the idea of them. And they're very similar to sort of like 16-inch like when you use two circulars, 16-inch circulars. I feel like I could actually, if they were a little longer, I would like them a little better than, I don't know if they have them in different lengths actually. I don't know what length mine are, but I mean, they're fine. I think the tips were okay. It's just I'm never quite sure how to hold them. So, I mean, it's just a personal preference though. So if you know somebody that has some and you can like give them a try to see if you like them, because they're not like they're kind of expensive for one set of needles. So yeah, and I've only bought, I think I've got 2 different sizes, but I don't like them enough to get any more sizes. But it's worth trying out if you can get some access to them and try them yourself. But yeah, I know they're not super cost effective to buy a set and then try and realize, oh, you hate them. But I mean, they're nice. I like them for what they are. I just wish, at least my set, I don't know if they might have them longer, but the set I have, I just wish they were a little bit longer. Okay, next question. How would I add short rows to the Anker pullover? Oh, I have plans to make a video about adding like short row neck shaping. I haven't looked at that one specifically, but am I remembering correctly that it has like a bunch of like 1x1 ribbing or something in the yoke? You can do short rows in like a ribbing pattern like that. And I think I did a live stream maybe in the last couple months about how like top-down neckline short rows work. So you could watch that to get an idea of how to do it. But I don't have a resource to recommend off the top of my head, but it's possible. I know I did a live showing like how to do it. You need to know your gauge and how many short rows you want to add for the length basically. And then you just spread them out for the circumference of the sweater itself. And you should be able to hide them if it's the sweater I'm thinking of, like you can use the pattern and you could still hide it within the pattern of the sweater. And then Gina, I'm wanting to work on tension. I want to knit lace, and I've noticed my work doesn't have the definition that others seem to have. Well, this could be a few things. Well, like I said earlier, when it comes to like record yourself and see if you have tension issues and things. Well, you have to figure out if you have issues first before you can know how to fix them. A couple things with lace, especially, well, I mean, lace is whole, this yarn overs. It depends on depends on the yarn overs. Like my yarn overs look different, like if depending on the increase or decrease on either side of them, whether I'm knitting or purling on either side of them, like can make the yarn overs can look like different sizes. Another thing can be the yarn you're using. Are you using like a really round 3-ply yarn? That's going to disguise a lot of the lace. It's better to use something like a 2-ply because it's flat compared to a 3-ply, which is very round. A 2-ply, they kind of like fold on top of each other and it's kind of a flat yarn. And that's often a better choice for lace because it really shows off the pattern a lot better. So you could try that. So I would, yeah, suggest recording yourself, seeing if you do have tension issues, and try some different yarns. If you've been using 3-ply, try a 2-ply and see if that makes a difference for you. And also when you're checking your tension, do some simple lace and look, is it like the holes for like one part look nice and big and then the holes in another part are smaller? Could be because of like the decreases around those yarn overs, or if it's going from a knit to a purl or something like that, where you're adding more yarn as you're moving between the stitches. So you have to think of like ways to compensate so they end up being the same size. And one more question from Ozge. Does a 3-needle bind off in the bottom up construction work like a seam on the shoulders? Yes, yes it does. Yeah, I would call that like structure at the shoulders. It definitely does. Like mattress stitch, or if you, I mean live stitches for 3-needle bind off, but yeah, you're adding a seam to that shoulder. Even picking up stitches, like if you're knitting top down and you start with the back at the shoulder line and then work down to the armhole, then you come back and pick up stitches, that can also feel like a seam as well. So it doesn't have to be like a seamed garment to get the structure of a seam. Like if you want to use plant fibers, then a 3-needle bind off would work really well. And yeah, I like to do it with a crochet hook instead of a 3rd needle. I just find it a lot easier to do. That is all of the pre-submitted questions. Let me go back to our chat and see if anybody has any comments about anything we just talked about. The knitting page. Can you I guess tell us more about your experience in the Master Hand Knitting program? Is there something specific you want to know? I do have at least one video about the Master's program that kind of walks through it. It's definitely not for everybody. There's a lot of written work as well. But I was a nerdy kid and I homeschooled my daughter, so I was really used to like working on reports and papers and doing all of that. So it wasn't like a huge stretch for me. A lot of people, when they think of all that, they're like, no, the knitting side of it, yes, they want to do, but it's the writing side that really scares them. So another option is the professional, I think that's what it's called, professional knitting certification, which is very similar, but it's more for people who like to be professional sample knitters, or just improve their knitting, but without having to do all of like the handwritten work of the master's program. There's more, but it goes further into, knitting to a specific gauge. Like if you have to knit for a designer, you have to match their gauge and follow their instructions and all of that. So that's another option. But the program is really great. I just know it's not for everybody. A lot of people, your knitting is your hobby. You don't want to turn it into something that feels like work. And this program takes a lot of time, and it can feel like work. But if anybody has any specific questions about it, I'm happy to answer them. I do have a video that kind of covers what happens in the program, but I'm not sure what to say about it without spending an hour talking about it. Okay, Jess has a question. She's usually answering questions, so I'm glad that she has a question. Anybody want to share their experience with 9-inch circulars? For me, they just hurt if it's anything but stockinette. I struggle with them too, Jess. I do use them. I've done a sock tutorial with them. And I had to I would find myself my shoulders were getting higher and higher. It was making me so tense. So I have to physically tell myself to relax because I tense up. Those needles are so short. I did find, because I bought a fixed circular, so the needle tips are exactly the same length. I found when I got an interchangeable set that has the adjustable, the different lengths, if I put I think it's a 2-inch and a 3-inch, I can still do the short circular, but I put a 3-inch in the working hand, in my right hand to work onto. That little bit of extra length does help. That improved things, but I I can't say I love them, honestly. Like I mean, if they're like the 12-inch, I don't mind, you know, like if it's for a sleeve, it's not so bad, but the smaller it gets, yeah, I'm not in love with that. So I don't know if anybody else had anything they wanted to say about that in the comments, but hopefully somebody has some thoughts. I do find I have to tell myself physically, relax, you don't have to tense all up. And trying to get the 3-inch tip in my right hand did help, but I still don't love them. Oh, and Farmer's Wife, I have a different gauge when I use the Flexi-Flips. Yeah, I think mine's the same, but that's something to check. Even like your needle configurations can change your gauge. I knit tightly on DPNs compared to like Magic Loop or 2 circulars, but if I use DPNs, it's a little bit tighter than I do for those others. So it's worth it if you're going to try different needle configurations, especially for those small circumferences, to see if you like if your gauge changes, because that might show up in like a sweater. You know, the body is like on a large needle and then your sleeve is going to be on something much smaller, and if you tend to knit tightly on a smaller circumference, your sleeve could end up smaller than you intend. So it's good to know those things when you have different needle configurations. Carolina from Chile. Oh, nice to have you here. Finishing up a pullover and want to wet block it. It's 100% Patagonian merino wool non-superwash. Was thinking about using the washing machine's spin cycle. I do. I've watched mine. I've sat there. I wanted to make sure it wasn't going to do anything terrible. Has a hand wash cycle where it doesn't really, I mean, it kind of rolls things a bit and then it stops, so they kind of sit. But then I do use like my spin cycle on mine. I mean, you can test it out on something else, or if you still have your swatch, test it on the swatch before you put your sweater in there. But I use mine, like the spin cycle is just, you know, just the force of it. It's not like spinning it in water. It's just getting the water out of it and wringing it out for you so it can dry more quickly. But like check your machine, maybe test with your swatch first just to make sure it's not going to affect it. But I really like to use the spin cycle to get out as much water as possible, because I find the longer my sweaters sit, especially if it's cold or damp or something, then they just start to get a little mildewy smell to them. So I try to get out as much water as I can so they'll dry more quickly. But yeah, I'm not saying do that. Test your swatch just in case. But oh, that sounds really nice. Patagonian merino wool. Fancy. Oh, a salad spinner. Anna says she uses a salad spinner, same idea as the washing machine, but less stress on the yarn. It works well. Yeah, I've got a small one that I can do like if I want to get like, I use it more for like if I'm dyeing yarn, because I can do like, you know, a hank of yarn in there and I want to get that water out quickly. But they even have like just standalone spinners, like just for things like this that you could use as well. But I guess my sweaters for my body are not going to fit in my little salad spinner, that's for sure. I know, I need to find a bigger salad spinner too. Okay, did the Master Hand Knitting program feel more like learning or more like a test? That's a good question. Well, they don't, it's not like they give you a textbook and then give you a test. They give you assignments. They'll tell you, okay, you have to do this swatch. They don't tell you how to do it. The whole program is a research program. Like you have to go buy your resources, get some, you know, find the YouTube videos you like or the blogs you like, and use those resources, and you list references. Like if you have to do a swatch that talks about how to do a knit two together in SSK, it's going to ask you for references for all of like each of those techniques, and those references have to match each other. But they're not telling you how to work a knit two together and an SSK in the MHK program. They're telling you this is what you have to do. Now go off and do the research, and then we'll judge your work, you know, based on your research. So it does, for me, felt like more like learning. I had not been knitting very long when I started the program. I started knitting in 2017 and I started the master's program in 2018. So I had not had a ton of knitting experience. For me, I used it as my way to learn how to knit. I wanted to knit well and I wanted to do it properly. So the program didn't teach me how to do any of this stuff, but it told me this is what you need to do. So now go get your books and your YouTube videos and learn how to do this stuff. And then show us your proof that you know how to do this stuff. So it did feel like learning to me. Because they're not giving you like a, there are questions as well that you have to answer. It didn't feel much like a test so much as an evaluation. But if you don't want people evaluating your knitting, this is not the right thing for you to do, because they will find fault with your knitting. And every level I had things I had to resubmit. Not so much with level 1. I did pretty well with that. I had a lot to resubmit for level 2. My seams were terrible. I think there's like a couple different swatches for seaming, and I had to resubmit all of them because I did so poorly. But you'll find that things that you thought you did super well, they might have different opinions on, and things that you really like are super angsty about, like you spend a lot of time obsessing about it, they're not even going to notice, like it's going to pass with flying colors. So you never can tell what things will stand out to them compared to what things stand out to you. But if you don't mind somebody evaluating your knitting, then it's a good learning experience, but it is a lot of work. And for a lot of people, it kind of turns their knitting into work. And if it's your hobby, then there is that fine line, that balance where, you take your hobby and, well, in my case, I monetized it. I turned it into my business, and now I teach knitting full time. So yes, I do have to think about different hobbies outside of work, because sometimes I don't want to knit because it feels like work. And the master's program depending on the type of person you are, can feel that way. But for others, it's like you are a nerd like me, and you want to find out like everything about knitting. And this program is not going to tell you everything, but it's going to help you learn how to research. Like if nothing else, like after you're doing this, even just the first level, you will know how to research. When you want to learn something new, like you just get really good at looking for good resources and dependable resources to learn. And also, the more you learn, the more you'll find you don't know. Like there's a lot. When I first started knitting, I learned like some basics, and I was making coasters and scarves, and like, this is great. I know everything. No, I've done that 3 levels of that program, and now I feel like I know a lot, and I've forgotten a lot, and I have to go back and remind myself about certain things because I just can't hold them in my brain. But I've discovered there's a lot that I still don't know, and other avenues that I'd like to explore. There's just a lot. Like there's a lot within knitting that you can learn and explore. So it is a really good program, but I don't think it's for everybody. And Craig is he's planning on starting the professional knitter course after the Taming Tension. It's the one best suited for my desired skill building. Yeah, they have lots of different classes, some like the basics class or the Taming Tension, which are smaller ones. So if you're thinking about one of these bigger programs like the professional knitter or the master hand knitter, try one of the smaller ones first. Like the basics is a really good program because you'll get that taste of being evaluated, and then you'll know if you like that or not. If you really despise having somebody evaluate your work, then you're not going to want to devote a lot of time to like the master hand knitting program. And it might be worth it to take something simple, or like the Taming Tension course. If you know you have tension issues, that's a really good course to work through. Now, back to that 9-inch circular talk for Jess. Farmer's Wife loves the 9-inch circulars for colorwork socks. Oh, that is a good tip. I think that would probably be my preferred method as well. I like 2 circulars. That's my favorite method, but I don't love that even for color work, like stranded knitting. I like to do stranded knitting in the round without the small circumference needles. So I bet 9-inch circulars would be the best. I haven't done any color work socks yet. I need to do some. Try that out. Yes, it's the tip length on the 9-inch circulars. I feel like I can't get a hold of anything. Yeah, if you can get one like an interchangeable set that has like a 2-inch and a 3-inch, I use the 2-inch in my left hand and the 3-inch in my right, and it does help it a little bit. It's for me, it was better than like the fixed circular where the 2 needle tips are the same exact length. Adding that little bit of length, that 3-inch, did help a little. Still not my favorite, but it's a little bit better. And I do use them when I'm knitting sleeves. Like I will use, it's not super fine needles, they're usually like a US 4 or something like that. But I do like them for knitting in the round, something like that. So if you can try one where it has like a 3-inch tip or a larger tip for one of the needles, then that might be worth trying out. Okay, the knitting page. I understand the logistics. I'm interested in your opinion of the overall program if you felt it was all worth it in the end. It was for me. In my situation, because I knew, well, I didn't know when I first started the program, but when I was, I think, in the middle of level 2, I had homeschooled my daughter. That was like my job for, well, since she was 3, all the way to her graduation. And at the same time, I had started like a homeschooling journal online. And then that kind of morphed into like a whole homeschooling website. So I was homeschooling, talking about it online. And then it was about the time for her to graduate. And I was kind of at loose ends with myself because had no plans to continue like writing about homeschooling on this website because she would be graduating and what am I going to talk about? So I sold that website. I had just finished the level 2 of the master's program, and I was at my kind of loose ends. What am I going to do now? She's like leaving the nest. I don't think I have the right brain for like going and working a 9 to 5 since I've homeschooled. We've had our own schedule for so long. I've worked for myself on the website and just discussing it with my husband at the time. So I'd finished level 2 at that point. He's like, well, because I loved teaching, I loved that, but I did not want to go teach in a classroom and I didn't want to have to go to school for that. He's like, well, why don't you teach knitting? At that point, I was still working through the master's program, and this was beginning of 2020 when I sold that website. So I'm like, okay, well, the Knitting Guild has the teacher certification. So why don't I do that while I'm taking a break? I needed a break between level 2 and level 3 because it was just a lot. My brain needed time to process. So I did the teacher certification. And while I was working through that, making lesson plans, oh my word, it was so much fun. I had such a blast with that program. I'm such a nerd. Like coming up with lesson plans was great. I loved it. But that solidified what I wanted to do. So for me, continuing and finishing the master's program was sort of like what I would call my street cred. Like I couldn't say that I'd been knitting since I was a child, like a lot of people can say if they want to like have a YouTube channel or teach knitting. I didn't have that. So for me, I wanted the master's program to be my credentials that even though I'd only been knitting since 2017, I had enough experience within that time to be a good teacher. So I guess it depends on your reason. Like, what's the reason you would want to pursue the program? If it's for learning and you love to learn and you don't think you're going to mind writing reports and finding references, then do it. I encourage you to do it. But a lot of people don't love that stuff. So those are the ones I would sort of warn off the program because it is a lot of writing, it's a lot of research, and a lot of time. The first level, even though I was a new knitter, only took me about 6 months. I don't think the first level is a huge time investment. Level 2, I think, took me about a year. And level 3 was probably close to 2 years by the time, because they send it to I think each level they send it to more people to evaluate. Like level 1 only goes to 1 evaluator, but I think level 3 goes to 3 different people. And then of course, if you have resubmits, and you might have like multiple resubmits, so it takes more time. So I think it was a little less than 2 years to finish that. But for me, yeah, I thought it was worth it in the end. For me, for what I wanted, my goal of being a knitting teacher, I wanted that sort of credential, that I was a certified knitting teacher, but I was also a master hand knitter. To me, that's why I wanted it. For other people, it might not be, you might have different goals or whatever, or if it's just a matter of you'd like to improve your knitting, there are multiple ways to do that. You can, look at like the program on Ravelry and see what swatches there are in each level. Like you can look at all the swatches and see what they have to do, and you can kind of make that, do it yourself. But I don't want to push people off it, but it's a lot of work, and I think you have to have the right kind of personality maybe to take the critique that's going to come your way, because you are going to have swatches that they're going to critique, and it might feel hard to you to hear that feedback about your knitting, or it might not. But it was worth it for me anyway. All of that to say, I thought it was worth it. Okay, just reading through comments here. I see Jess and Farmer's Wife are talking about knitting continental. I wonder, is that in regards to 9-inch circulars? I do knit with the yarn on my left hand as well. I hadn't thought that maybe that is part of the reason I find it difficult. Maybe. Yeah, same, Jess. feel like I'm all thumbs in a death grip. Yeah, you got to relax the hands, relax the hands. Maybe I hadn't thought, but maybe it is something about having the yarn in your left hand. I should, if you knit with either hand, try it in your right and see if it's a little different that way. And Kay, I've been known to throw my hand washed or block socks in the lettuce spinner to get water out of them. Yeah, same. Yeah, I've done that before. Small things. My sweaters aren't going to fit, but I have one that I use for dyeing yarn, and it's great for getting like all of the liquid out or the water out of your garments. Okay, so Dawn says she uses 9-inch circulars. And Jess, how long has everybody been knitting? I'd like to know that. We are closing in on our time here. Jess has been knitting over 40 years. That's fabulous. My mother was a knitter, and she taught me lots of crafty things, but I did not take to knitting as a kid. Like I just didn't. I don't know why. Like I did cross stitch and embroidery and crochet a little bit. No, I have not been knitting forever. I haven't been knitting very long compared to a lot of people. Oh, yes, Monique, that's a really good tip. When somebody asked about lace and her tension issues, did you consider blocking a swatch to see how it opens up? When it comes to lace, yes, it makes a huge difference when you wash. And yeah, usually when I say block, I just mean wash and dry. Like I'm not stretching my sweaters out to death when I wash them and dry them. But when it comes to lace, yeah, I am stretching that out because I want to see the detail and I want to see the yarn overs. Definitely a good tip, Monique. Thank you for sharing that. It's good to have you here, Monique. Okay, Jess, another question. We've talked about this privately, so you know that I'd like to get into tech editing, and I would also like to make sure that I'm knitting technically sound ways so that I could help while editing. Yeah. Oh, then the master program. Yeah, it's still, you could take the tech editing course first and then see what you think you need to improve. And then decide if it's worth it to do the master's program from there. But with all of your knitting experience, I'm not sure you need, it really depends though, but because I think well, first of all, the TKGA tech editing program, I have taken that one as well. I tell you, I'm a nerd. I think I've taken most of their courses. They're big ones, I haven't taken any of the little ones. And that one was probably the hardest one for me because I'm not very technical. But what's good about it is there's actually, Sharon Lovering, she's the one who edits Cast On Magazine for TKGA. She's the one, I think, who's still the instructor for this program. And she checks all of your work and she will send it back and tell you, you still have to go through this pattern again because you missed this many things and you have to find the mistakes and fix them. So I love it for that because there is somebody who's actually checking your work and you don't pass a level until she tells you you've passed a level. And I know there are other tech editing like learning programs out there, but I'm not aware of any that has actually somebody telling you that you're ready to move on to the next level. The ones I've seen are more watch these videos and then you can call yourself a tech editor. You might not be a very good tech editor, or you might be a totally fabulous one, but my preference is this program because somebody's actually checking your work and making sure that you know how to do things before you can move on to the next part of the program. But I found it to be the toughest, but I'm not very math minded and like technical and, having to read stitch counts and do all the math and check all the math. I have issues with my own math. I don't want to check other people's math. So I don't work. I do some tech editing work for a few people, but it's not advertised. I don't do it for a lot of people because it's not my favorite thing to do. But if you want to tech edit, then yes, I would say definitely get the certification. And then it might be worth it because the Master Hand Knitting program does give you sort of that extra credential. You're a certified tech editor and you're a master hand knitter. So in your case, it could be a good time investment to do the master's program for you if you have that goal of, you like to have that certification because it just ups your game as putting yourself out there as a tech editor. So I think it could work for that as well. Okay. And Craig, TKGA recommends taking the basics class if you want to start the master hand knitting or the professional knitting certification to get comfortable with your work being critiqued. Yes, so I didn't know they'd recommended it for PKC, but that's really good to know. And yeah, it's definitely a good idea. It's a smaller program. I think it used to be 3 levels. I think it probably still is. But it's like, put them in a little envelope and send them to Arenda Holiday. I think she's still the teacher of it. She is the one who's like the head of the whole TKGA organization. And you get a good idea if you can handle being critiqued or not on a very small program, before you dive into one of these larger programs. And yes, and because the learning style, the course style is very much similar. They're going to give you like a list of, I think actually the basics actually gives you like almost some handouts that explain some things. You're not going to get those in the master's program. And I don't know about the professional knitter program, but it's all dependent. They give you like a list of questions, a list of swatches that you have to do and a bunch of stuff. And it's your job to go off and research and do it. Oh, so yeah, Jess, I totally enjoyed writing lesson plans and making classroom samples when I was getting my teaching degree. Oh goodness, you'll love the master's program then. Yes. You'd be fine with it, I think, if you're good with that. And you'll probably be fine with all of your experience, your 40 years of knitting experience. I think the tech editing program, you'll probably breeze right through it too. And I'm better suited to research and behind the scenes help. If I could prep for teachers and let them get in front of the class, I'd be all in. That could be something that you do offer. If you do that, that's another, like, you take your tech edit certification, you do your master's program, and then you could build your business on, or even take the teacher certification if you wanted to, but build your business on helping other teachers build their lesson plans when it comes to knitting or whatever. I bet there would be a market for that. Okay. Oh, so how long people have been knitting? The knitting page has been knitting for 3 years. Osgay has been knitting 2 years. Good for you, Osgay. Crocheting for 23 years. And Donna for about 60 years. So we're running the gamut here. And Jess learned to crochet first and then learned to knit when she was about 10. And then Craig knitted years or so. I don't want to think about how long it's been since high school. It's longer than I think sometimes. Elvira has been knitting since she was 11 and she's now 63. And Farmer's Wife, grandmother taught her when she was 5 and she's now 63. I picked it back up when I started having grandkids, so 11 years ago. Yeah, I've talked to a few people who it's gone through like cycles where they learned when they were young, they stopped for a while, and then either when they had kids or grandkids, they sort of picked it up again. I think that's great. And Carolina's been knitting since 2021. Nice. And New York Knitter, 40 years. Crochet, tat, macrame, cross stitch, knitting came last. Oh, so all the crafts. I've got a list I'd like to start. And Donna for about 60 years. Mary learned 20 years ago, did not get serious until 3 years ago. Okay, about the 9-inch circulars again. I got a set and I'm fine for vanilla socks from 2 millimeter to maybe 3.5 over 4 end up hurting my hands and wrists. Yeah, so the thicker needles, you don't like those. Yeah, it is hard on the hands, I think. Like they just feel something about those small needle tips. And Kay's been knitting for 20 years, but took a large break in the middle. Hundreds of dishcloths during this time to keep my hands busy. Yes, busy hands, quiet mind. Oh, I agree. Doing garments and socks. Yeah, there's something about just the act of knitting that can quiet the mind. And I totally get where you're coming from, Kay. And Jess, I edit and format quilting designs for a living, so it might be a sort of natural fit along with a strong interest in math. Oh goodness, yes, with your math skills, the tech editing course is going to be a breeze for you. And Anna, crocheting for 35 plus years, only knitting seriously since 2021. My mom taught me to knit as a child, but I lost it when I started crocheting. Enjoyed relearning the process, yes. So, oh yeah, that's a good one. There's a YouTube channel called Knit Talk with a Tech Editor. Oh no, go ahead and mention other people. I've watched some of her videos too. Somebody mentioned wanted to know about short rows. I think that Knit Talk with the Tech Editor also has a video on short row shaping for top-down sweaters that might be worth looking into. And we have a baby knitter here. Hey Dawn, welcome. About 1 year. Oh, we're so glad you're here. And Diana she's 80 and been knitting off and on since about 10. Learned from my mom, mostly socks and simpler things. You know, I love it when I hear people say that it was their grandmother or their mom. I feel like that's just such a treasure to have that memory of, you know, that they taught you this skill and you're still doing it. For me, it was my sister-in-law. So whenever I talk about knitting, I'm like, yep, my sister-in-law is the one who taught me how to knit. And another tatter. We need to have a conversation about tatting. I feel like I could start going down rabbit holes for lots of other things. Okay, that looks like everything. We don't have any other questions in the chat. And I think, yeah, nothing else. So we're going to get into just ending things. We are at our hour mark, and I don't like to go much over that. So hopefully I had a lot of time to just knit. And thank you for hanging out with me and answering the questions and talking about all the things that we talked about today. Our next live stream will be in 2 weeks, Tuesday, June 3rd at 11 a.m. Eastern, same time, same place. It will be our Knit and Chat live episode, and I think that one is going to be all about sock knitting books. So I'll be asking sometime in the community what recommendations you have for sock knitting books, and we're going to dive into that topic at our next live event. And I think that is all. So if you are catching the replay, I'm going to have links for everything we've talked about down below and timestamps so you can jump around to everything. And thank you so much for hanging out with me. And for those doing the replay, here's a playlist. If you haven't watched this season of Knitting 411, then you can go see what other questions we've discussed by clicking on that video. And if you've been watching a while, I'll let YouTube put a video here that you might want to watch next. And that's it for today. Thanks so much for hanging out with me, everybody.